Hello, I'm Edward October. Over the years, I've narrated more ghost stories, horror shows, and creepypastas than I can count. And yet, the crimes discussed on our true crime podcast managed to scare the shit out of me. This program is not suitable for children or the faint of heart. If you are such a person, go ahead and switch off this podcast. Listen to something else. Are you still with us? Well, we've warned you.
Hey, Jen.
Hey, Kim. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty okay. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I say this every year, but I can't believe it's June already. Half the year has gone.
I'm telling you, just the older you get, the faster it goes. I swear that's true, though, isn't it?
It is. It's unbelievable. My daughter graduated high school. My other one's going to be a junior.
No.
It's
I don't like that.
flown by. And this
Nope.
year, boom, in an instant, it's gone.
Yep.
Like half over.
I know. I don't like it.
Same.
Speaking of not liking it, I hear
That
you have
one.
a case.
Yep, I do. Not that you don't like me, my episodes.
Well, I don't, but that's not. I meant more.
I know
like,
what you're saying.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean. Yeah.
All right, ready?
Yep. Let's go.
The summer between sophomore and junior years of high school is a special time. By that point, most teenagers have reached the age of 16, and that's when they can drive and be more independent. But, they're still young enough to spend long summer days watching movies and hanging out with friends at the pool or the lake. John Mellencamp tells us to hold on to 16 as long as you can, and for good reason. Adult life isn't far off, and it often brings swift and unexpected changes.
0 out of 10 would not recommend.
Thank you. All the times we wanted to be adults, and here we are.
Yep.
In 1991, in the small community of Ramsey, Illinois, which, by the way, when I was working at Scholastic, this was my territory.
Oh.
Just an hour and a half northeast of St. Louis, the long, hot, lazy summer days were playing out a little differently than 16-year-old Krystal Naab expected. She lived in a mobile home with her mother and 2 siblings, a brother Curtis and a sister named Melody. She spent time with her boyfriend, who she had plans to marry, and she hung out with her friends. Krystal loved to help people, she loved children, and she was known to be a very independent girl. She was an average student and well-liked by her teachers. Krystal had worked on the yearbook staff with her best friend, and everybody described her as genuinely a sweet person. And it's unclear if Krystal knew, but she was also 3 months pregnant. Ramsey, Illinois is a town of just under 1,000 people, a very small town. It's quiet, surrounded by farmland, and pretty inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. So much so that Google Maps didn't even bother to drive down the few streets in town.
That's pretty small.
Yeah. Some people would consider life unpleasant or dull in a town like that, while others, especially the lifelong residents, considered it heaven on earth and a wonderful place to raise a family. And up until July 23rd of 1991, most people held on to the belief that bad things didn't really happen in a place like Ramsey. So July 23rd was shaping up to be a scorcher. You know how hot it gets in July in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And by 7:30 a.m., it was already warm and humid. Since one of Krystal's chores was to mow the lawn, her brother Curtis woke her up before he left for work. He reminded her that it was going to be hot and that she needed to get the grass cut while it was still cool outside. Curtis then headed out the door to go do landscaping work for his Uncle Ronnie, unaware of the horror he would later come home to. At about 12:25 p.m., the mailman delivered the mail to Krystal's trailer. Krystal waved to him like she often did, and the mailman noticed a white truck parked into the driveway. Krystal's boyfriend also drove a white truck, but this one wasn't his. This one was a smaller Dodge pickup. The mailman waved back and moved on to deliver the rest of his route. Several neighbors also noticed the small white pickup truck parked at Krystal's trailer. Exact times are hard to pin down, but the consensus was that it was seen somewhere between 12 a.m. and 3 p.m. At 4 p.m., Krystal's brother Curtis returned home from work to a gruesome sight. his beloved little sister was laying face down on the floor in a pool of blood just inside the entrance to the trailer. He immediately fell to his knees and rolled her over to see if she was still alive, but there was so much blood, it completely covered her face. He ran for the phone to call 911, but the cord had been pulled out of the wall. He stumbled to the bathroom to get wet washcloths to wipe the blood away from her mouth and nose. And when Krystal didn't react to the cool washcloths, Curtis realized she was probably beyond his help and went to the neighbor's house to use their phone. Police arrived shortly thereafter, and they discovered that 16-year-old Krystal Naab had been stabbed 81 times.
81 times?
81 times, with a pair of scissors that were kept in a china cabinet in the living room. The scissors were found on the kitchen counter covered in blood. Krystal was only wearing a black t-shirt and underwear. There was a sheet wrapped around her ankle, and there was a box fan blowing on her body, presumably in an attempt to dry the blood. Her shorts lay in a nearby hallway, and her t-shirt had been tucked into the back of her underwear. And even though the blood flow showed that she had died on her back, Curtis had found her face down on the carpet, and that carpet had been soaked with her blood. The police surmised that whoever killed her had tried to cover up a sexual assault by redressing her, and there was also evidence that the killer had taken time to clean up the scene. The crime scene technicians informed the detectives that they were positive that whoever did this would have cuts on their hands. In a frenzy style of stabbing, blood can often make the knife, or in this case scissors, slippery, causing the killer's hand to slide down on the blade. And so the technician said to be on the lookout for a suspect that would have cuts on the outside of his fingers or palms. Okay, now the outside is kind of weird
I know what
meaning.
you mean.
But
Outside.
it's like, the meaning is if you were to hold your hand out with your thumbs pointing to the sky, the cuts would be on the underside of the fingers. Just to be, because at first they're like outside, thinking the back of his hands. But yeah, that's not it.
I gotcha. I knew what you meant.
The investigators' first order of business was to interview the neighbors. Over and over, the people who lived nearby, including the mailman and passersby, mentioned that a small white truck had been parked in the driveway. Some witnesses reported that the truck was there as early as 10 a.m., but as we say all the time, witnesses are not always accurate, and especially about exact times. Investigators knew that the murder occurred after 12:25 p.m. because Krystal had waved to the mailman at that time. Some reports said that the truck was there a little later than 10, meaning closer to 10:30, and one witness said that they saw the truck driving in the direction towards the trailer at 10:15. Another witness said that they saw the truck leaving the trailer's driveway at around 3 p.m. Either way, it appeared as though Krystal had let her killer in and had possibly visited with him a while before the attack began. This meant that Krystal most likely knew her killer, or at least was familiar with him. So, I mean, it could have been a friend of, hers or her mother or siblings.
An acquaintance of some sort.
Some sort, right. Police asked a shaken and horrified Curtis Naab if he knew anybody who drove a small white truck. Somebody who knew well enough that Krystal may have let him in the house. And almost right away, Curtis said, Stuart Heaton. He explained that he used to be pretty good friends with Stuart and that Stuart used to live just about 3 miles away from the Naab's residence and had visited Curtis at the trailer on a few occasions. So it is likely that Krystal would have at least recognized him. At the time Curtis hung around Stuart, he drove a brand new, small, white Dodge Dakota pickup truck, and the pair would drive the backcountry roads drinking beer. Isn't that what all teens do in our area?
Small town
right?
America
Small
back
town?
then. Yep.
Drive drinking beer. The only catch was that, according to Curtis, he hadn't really seen or associated with Stuart in 2 or 3 years. They'd had a falling out, and Stuart had moved to Bluff City, about 15 miles south of Ramsey. The police located 25-year-old Stuart Heaton in Bluff City, where he worked as a carpenter and a roofer. And sure enough, he still owned that 1989 Dodge Dakota. Stuart had got married in the years since he'd been friends with Curtis, and his wife Karen was pregnant with their first child. At 8:15 p.m., Illinois state troopers arrived at the Heaton home to interview Stuart. They put handcuffs on him and took him down to the police station. The whole time he protested that he hadn't done anything wrong. Once at the station, the police noticed that Stewart had several small cuts on his hand. When asked how he'd gotten them, he replied that he was a carpenter. He said that a carpenter without cuts on his hand wasn't a carpenter at all, but just an observer. And it's kind of funny because one of the documentaries I watched on this, the police said, well, I have a carpenter friend that says only a bad carpenter would have cuts on his hand.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, you're doing it wrong, buddy.
And then Stewart said, well, yeah, I guess I'm a bad carpenter then. Yeah.
Oh.
It was kind of funny. However, these cuts were exactly where the crime scene tech had said that they would be. They were on the outside of his fingers and also on his palm. There was also paring type cuts, normally caused by open scissors, and they matched the wounds inflicted on Krystal. A large cut was noted on the back of his right calf, and a cut was on his forehead, which Heaton said was a pimple.
I'm just thinking about how scary that would be to be that mailman and like she waved. You know what I mean? Like as a male person, and I'd be like, this young girl waved at me. I waved at her. And you mean to tell me she walks in and then just, is murdered?
Gets murdered.
Ugh, scary.
Investigators next asked Stewart about his alibi for the day. And Stewart Heaton said that he left his house at about 9 a.m. to go to the lumber yard in Vandalia, 12 miles from Ramsey. He said he did several carpenter's errands and gave an estimate for a roofing job. When one of the detectives asked for the name and address of the person he'd given the roofing estimate to, Heaton asked why. And he maintained that he had done nothing wrong. A search of Heaton's home and truck turned up nothing that could be linked to Krystal Naab or the crime scene. And while he did have cuts on his hands, he also didn't have any scratch marks or fingernail gouges on his arms or face. So for a while, the wounds on Heaton's hands and the fact that he drove a white truck were the only things connecting Stewart to the crime. Just circumstantial evidence. However, police felt early on that he was their man. And what are the odds that the first guy they found, who drove a white truck and was familiar with the victim, and would have the exact wounds on his hand that the crime scene technician said their perpetrator would have. As the investigation went on, it was discovered that the mailman actually knew Stewart Heaton, knew him personally, and said that he hadn't just seen any old white truck parked in Krystal's driveway, but he had recognized it being Stewart's truck specifically. Another witness described the hubcaps on the truck that he had seen parked on the trailer, and Stewart's truck had those same hubcaps. It's like some kind of thick, bulky hubcaps. The witness who said that they saw the truck leaving Krystal's driveway around 3 p.m. gave a description of the driver, and that matched Stewart Heaton. However, a different person gave a description of the driver he saw and got the color of the hair wrong. And while investigators felt as though they had their guy, supporters of Stewart Heaton were quick to point out that eyewitnesses' accounts can often be unreliable. They're no dummies. They know that, as we all do.
Yeah, but the car, that's,
It's
if you know the person drives that car and you're like, oh, there's so-and-so's car.
They also point out that there were no defense wounds found on Heaton from where Krystal would have tried to fight back. Also, all the other physical items in the trailer, including a bloody palm print, couldn't be linked to Heaton. And aside from the palm print, most of the hair and fiber evidence probably belonged to people who lived in the house. It's never been publicly declared who that palm print belonged to, so it's impossible to say if it belonged to an unknown suspect or if it belonged to Curtis, Krystal, or possibly a new police officer or technician that worked at the crime scene. Also, Heaton's truck had a toolbox in the bed of his truck when he was picked up by the police, but none of the eyewitnesses mentioned that the truck that they saw had a toolbox.
Oh.
However, this part was soon explained as a neighbor came forward to say that he had helped Stewart put a toolbox in the back of his truck at around 6 p.m. that night, several hours after the murder occurred.
Oh.
An autopsy was performed on Krystal, and that's when they discovered that she was pregnant. And they also found a trace of semen, which they found in her pubic hair. And even though the police suspected sexual assault, the coroner could not 100% determine if she had been raped. At this point, Krystal's boyfriend had been cleared as a suspect. On September 11th, 1991, Stewart Heaton was indicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder and was arrested later that day. He voluntarily waived his right to a speedy trial and authorities retrieved a blood sample from him to compare against the semen sample found on Krystal's body. While Stewart sat in jail for 4 months awaiting the results of the DNA test, the police continued to investigate Stuart Heaton's side of the story and the possible alibis that he claimed could exonerate him.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately for Stewart, many of the people who claimed to have seen him driving in other parts of the county could not determine for sure what day they had seen him. Upon her first interview with the police the night of the murder, Stewart's wife, Karen, told the police that Stewart had dropped her off at work that morning and that he was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. A coworker of hers told them that Stewart had stopped by Karen's work that afternoon just to visit Karen on her break, which he rarely did.
Mm-hmm.
The coworker reported that Karen had made the comment that the visit surprised her and that Stewart was acting very strangely.
Mm-hmm.
She also told them that when Stewart picked her up later that evening, he had changed clothes, and this time he was wearing sweatpants and a long-sleeved shirt. In the summer.
To hide marks, possibly?
I don't know, but it's sweatpants and a long-sleeved shirt in the summer is weird. July.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, this is the early 1990s, and as we know, DNA science is not as advanced as it is today. But when the DNA came back from the American Red Cross Blood Services Laboratory, Dr. Robert Allen said that Stewart's DNA matched the semen sample found on Krystal's body, and he said that the chances of the DNA profile from the sample randomly matching another white male were 1 in 52,600.
Oh.
While that might seem impressive, experts said that it really wasn't. They would have felt better if it had been like 1 in a million.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but what are the chances, you know?
Exactly. In a small town.
In a
less
small
than 1,000
town,
people.
right?
Yeah.
They know each other. Come on now.
Yeah. Hey guys, it's been 3 weeks since I've been using the Spa Styler Blow Dry and Scalp Massager Hair Dryer by Yaman USA, and let me tell you, I think it's the best hair tool I've used in a long time. I mean, it's definitely worth splurging on. I'm amazed that it uses less heat but somehow dries my hair twice as fast. And it's also super lightweight and a heck of a lot quieter than my other hair dryer. It also has red light therapy technology, and I think it's the only one on the market. The red light helps promote hair growth, and while I haven't been using it long enough to see any growth, my hair does look a lot shinier, smoother, and healthier. Hardly any frizz at all. Oh, and the scalp massager attachment is so very relaxing, so very soothing. I mean, it helps lift my hair up at the roots, which gives me volume. And also, if you're lucky enough to have curly hair, you can also use the attachment as a diffuser. I really do like the Spa Styler Blow Dry and Scalp Massage Hair Dryer, and I don't think I'll ever use any other brand again. If you want to experience the future of beauty, you can visit yamanusa.com and use code TCP for a 20% discount. That's code TCP at yamanusa.com to get your 20% discount. In June of 1992, Stewart's trial for the murder of Krystal Naab began. Stewart decided not to testify on his own behalf, and according to the Unsolved Mysteries episode, Heaton said that his religion teaches that faith must be put in God rather than anyone else, including himself.
Mm-hmm.
Stewart's mother, Dovey, testified as a hostile witness and said that Stewart visited her home at 3:25 p.m. that afternoon of the murder. They lived about 6 miles from Naab's trailer, and when he arrived at their home, he was wearing dark blue sweatpants and no shirt. She also testified that he had gone horseback riding that afternoon. Stewart's wife, Karen, also testified as a hostile witness. She changed her story from what she told the police on the evening her husband was taken in for questioning. She had originally said that he had changed clothes from jeans to sweatpants sometime during the day, but in court, under oath, she said that he hadn't changed clothes and that he had put on a t-shirt and sweatpants that morning because he couldn't fit into his jeans.
Mm-hmm.
And with that statement, we're to believe that he only had one pair of jeans to choose from that morning, and they're ones that no longer fit, which kind of be embarrassing under oath. My wife was going to wear jeans, but they didn't fit.
Yeah.
His wife also denied making the statements to her coworker that Stewart had visited her at work and that he'd been acting strangely.
Okay, nobody would forget that. I'm sorry. You just wouldn't forget that because, well, okay, let me correct that. I would not forget that because I'm nosy as can be. And if my coworker's like, Cam, my husband came in, I would remember that very distinctly.
Well, and you wouldn't make that up. That's not anything that you would make up.
No, and did other people see him come in that day?
I have no idea. I don't know. It's not known. Krystal's brother, Curtis, testified at the trial, and he claimed that one night, several years ago, he awoke from sleep to find his friend Stuart in the bedroom that Curtis shared with his sister.
Oh.
Stuart was talking to Curtis's sister, Melody. Stuart then asked him to leave. And however, Stuart said that the night in question went completely differently. He said that Krystal's mother had answered the door and sat at the kitchen table with him until Curtis came out of his bedroom to talk with him. And since the two are friends, it's possible that there was more than one night when Stuart visited the trailer and they were just mixing their nights up. But either way, Curtis's testimony proved that Stuart had been to the trailer and he at least met the Naab sisters. The DNA evidence was what prosecutors had put their hopes on, so it was up to the defense to poke holes into that evidence. And it all came down to the interpretation of the evidence and a debate between two expert witnesses on whether bands were present in the semen sample found on Krystal's body. And it was also discovered that there were discrepancies between the identification of several key exhibits used in the trial, including the vial that contained Stuart's blood. Dr. Crane, a DNA profiling expert at Wright State University, was certain that Dr. Allen did his best with what was available to him, but the semen sample was not in the best condition. Dr. Crane also said that he would feel very uncomfortable sending a person to prison based on the DNA evidence alone. Remember, this is 1992, right?
Yeah.
And he's trying to poke holes, right?
Mm-hmm.
According to the statistical method used in the trial, 1 in 52,600 white male possibilities broke down to mean that there were 4,800 other white men in the United States who could have committed this crime. If you divide that equally by 50 states, we're down to just 96 white males per state on average who could have committed this crime. This is a lot of math.
Mm-hmm. I get you.
Yeah. Now, how many of those drove a white truck and knew the victim? However, one of the controversies of this case was that if different statistical methods was applied, the number would rise from 4,800 possible killers to 48,000 possible killers in the United States.
Mm.
The defense argued that the science seemed far from accurate. Remember, they've got to try to get their client off. That's what they're what they're made for.
It'd be different if this happened in New York City, right? A sprawling metropolis.
But you got to put that benefit of the doubt in, right?
I know. A reasonable doubt. Yeah, I get you.
Mm-hmm. But for the jury, it must have been enough. Or maybe it was the DNA evidence in addition to Stuart's vehicle being seen at the trailer by numerous witnesses, the cuts on his hands, and the fact that he did know the victim. That convinced them of his guilt because it took the jury just 90 minutes to convict Stuart Heaton. Now, the Stuart Heaton team, the ones that believed Stuart, they weren't believing this. They wouldn't let it go. So an independent investigator later found that there were 100 white trucks registered to the people in Fayette County, Illinois in 1991. Fayette County is where Ramsey, Illinois is. 10 to 12 of those were Dodge Dakotas. Heaton's defense team tried to say that it was one of the other owners of the white truck who had killed Krystal. In fact, there was one man with a lengthy criminal history who knew the family and was seen with Krystal a few days before her murder, which he later denied.
Mm.
But this man, his brother, owned a white Dodge Dakota truck like the one seen in Krystal's trailer. A convicted felon said that he had overheard the man say that he had killed Krystal to punish her brother Curtis over an unpaid drug debt.
Mm.
The police said that they investigated this individual in question and ruled him out. And whether that was because he was out of town or at work at the time of the murder, or maybe he just didn't have access to his brother's truck that day, who knows? It's uncertain, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what ruled him out. It's never been revealed. It's also never been revealed to the public if those other 12 Dodge Dakota owners had their DNA tested or not. At Stuart Heaton's sentencing hearing, 2 other women came forward with very damaging testimony. One woman said that when she was 15 years old, around Halloween time of 1986, She had gone to a party and passed out from drinking too much. When she came to, Stewart, who was 20 years old at the time, was raping her.
Oh.
Her friend, who was with her that night, also testified that she had overheard Stewart say that if she told anybody, he'd, quote, take care of her. Neither girl went to the authorities or even told their parents because they were afraid that they would get in trouble or that Stewart would make good on his promise and come after them. Another woman testified that one night, after she'd spurned Heaton's sexual advances, he scratched her car with a rock. She was also just 15 years old at the time. Heaton had been arrested for that crime, but the charges were dropped when his mother, Dovey, paid for the damage inflicted on the car. Krystal's brother, Curtis, had been a witness to this incident. By Stewart's mother paying for the damage, she effectively swept the real issue under the rug. The real issue wasn't the damage to her car. It was that her son, Stewart, not only felt entitled to have sex with whichever underage girl he wanted, but that he reacted quite badly to rejection. Stewart Heaton was sentenced to life in prison at the Menard Correctional Center in Chester, Illinois, on July 31st, 1992, 1 year after Krystal Naab was brutally murdered. The judge ruled that Stewart would never be eligible for parole. Heaton's mother managed to get his case onto the show Unsolved Mysteries in 1994. DNA was still new and largely misunderstood at the time, and the show garnered support for Heaton's innocence.
Oh.
In addition, some people found it strange that Krystal's brother Curtis would immediately think of Stewart Heaton when asked if he knew of anybody who drove a small white pickup truck. One investigator for the defense said that if Curtis had not mentioned that Stewart drove the white truck, Stewart would have never even been a suspect in the first place. But the incident with the girl whose car Heaton scratched in retaliation for denying him sex probably stuck with Curtis. Apparently, Curtis was disturbed by the vibe he caught from Heaton when he found him talking to his sister in the middle of the night. In fact, it's rumored that both of those incidents contributed to their falling out. In August of 1995, Stewart Heaton requested to have his conviction overturned, claiming that his original defense attorney failed to represent him properly at his trial. He also claimed that there was a strong evidence that another person killed Krystal. In June of 1997, his request was denied. In 1999, a panel of 5 district appellate court judges granted Stewart an evidentiary hearing. Stewart claimed that the other man with the criminal history whose brother drove the white truck was not properly investigated and that his original attorney failed to bring this up at trial. Investigators denied that accusation. Heaton also claimed that his original attorney failed to present evidence that he made a phone call from his sister's home at 3:24 p.m. on the day of the murder, and there was no way he could have made it from Krystal's home to his sister's home in 9 minutes. And honestly, his attorney most likely didn't introduce that evidence since it directly contradicted his mother's testimony, because his mother said that Stewart was at her house at 3:25 p.m. Heaton's conviction was upheld. Still, his supporters, they're not giving up. They did not give up. In July of 2001, a Fayette County judge declared that Stewart Heaton was entitled to a new round of DNA tests. And because of the advancements made in DNA science, many convicted criminals were getting a second chance at proving their innocence. It's not as if there's no precedent for investigators getting tunnel vision. We've seen this all before. You know, that they zero in on who they think is guilty and they just ignore evidence that says otherwise. It does happen, we know. So finally, once and for all, this matter is going to be settled.
Okay.
The tests came back. And the odds of the semen coming from a white male other than Stewart, are you ready? 1 in 31 billion.
Okay, good.
Considering that there's close to 8 billion people on the planet, it's pretty much, it's a definitive answer.
Why would he even allow them to do that?
I don't know.
Hoping that it would go his way?
Maybe he didn't understand the whole DNA evidence thing. He didn't know that you can't get around it. It's the truth. It's what happens. You can't lie with it. But I'll tell you, despite the DNA evidence, Stewart Heaton and several supporters still maintain his innocence, claiming that the DNA sample, that was tested in 2001, they say that it was actually tested against Stewart's own DNA sample that he gave when he was arrested in 1991. instead of the DNA that was from the crime scene. Yeah. Which the problem with that accusation, besides being based on absolutely nothing, was the sample from the crime scene was semen, and the sample that Stewart gave when he was arrested was blood. So if some person that works in the lab confused those two, they probably don't need to be in the science part anymore.
Science,
right? I mean, they're two totally different things. To the untrained eye, you would know the difference between semen and blood.
Yes,
right?
would.
I would hope. Still, again, he petitioned for a new trial in 2003, and he was denied. And in 2007, he filed a petition for habeas relief, which is the right of a citizen to obtain protection against illegal imprisonment. But again, he was denied.
Buddy,
give it up. I know. Come on.
Free yourself.
Right? Now, some have questioned if Krystal Naab and Stuart Heaton could have had a relationship on the side, and maybe
I was waiting for that. I was waiting for that thing.
Maybe the baby was actually Stuart's, and getting rid of Krystal and the baby would have been a surefire way to keep the news of his infidelity from his wife. That's an excellent motive. However, it's just pure speculation. And if true, Krystal had indeed kept the secret if she had even known she was pregnant. But unfortunately, there's no DNA taken from the fetus, so we don't know.
Yeah.
Others speculate that maybe Heaton had run into Krystal in a week or two leading up to her murder, maybe at the grocery store or at a gas station. And just that's what spawned his desire to have her.
Ugh.
So, but we will likely never know exactly what led to the crime because the one person in 31 billion who could answer that question is stubbornly refusing to admit his guilt. Krystal Naab would have been 50 years old this year.
Aww.
Her baby would have been 33, possibly have a family of their own. The future that seemed clear for Krystal in 1991, marriage and motherhood, never came to fruition because of the act of one selfish person.
So did the brother ever say why he thought? Was it vengeance against the brother?
Not that they know.
It's never really said.
No, never really said.
Okay.
And it's not known why he was there. He's not talking. He could have just been on his way to his mother's house, could have seen Krystal outside mowing the lawn, and
just pulled over to say hi to her, and then things went sideways.
Or he had the intention of hurting her. She was the age that he liked. I mean, the two other girls that had claimed that he had hurt them were both 15. She was 16.
It's just, after a while, just give it up. You know what I mean? Let some people have peace in their life.
I don't understand. When DNA is that 1 in 31 billion? Seriously, there's a little less than 8 billion people on the planet. Unless they just don't believe science.
Serial killer Lorenzo Gilliard said when the DNA came back to him, he's like, I don't believe it. That's not true. It's not true. Buddy, it is true. It is true. Yes, it most certainly is.
Yeah,
that's
just don't.
Choosing not to deal with what's going on. They got you. They got you. What are you going to do?
I don't know. You just
give
it up. Let the family.
He would admit that to somebody in prison or something somewhere, right?
Right. I mean, he's not getting out ever. So why not?
Give it up, buddy.
I mean, what is it in Shawshank that they say the prisons are full with innocent men?
Oh, yeah. They're all innocent, all of them.
But come on. There's proof. I mean, DNA you can't get around it. Exactly. You can't get around the DNA.
That's why I was waiting for him to say, okay, we were having a secret affair, because that's the old standard excuse they always give. That would have we were having a secret affair. I'm sure it's not true, but that would explain how come his car was there when nobody else was. That would explain the semen. But that would also explain that you were one of the last to see her alive.
If you go on, just to let you know how documentaries can be totally one-sided.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
There is, I think it was a court TV show, and it was called something like The Wrong Man, Stuart Heaton. I'll have it in the show notes, but it's a 3-parter on YouTube. And it's 3 parts because they only uploaded 12, 10 or 15 minutes, whatever, parts to it. And they interview the man that they think with the other Dodge truck that they said the brother might have killed. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
And that guy willingly went on the interview with them?
Right. And he's like,
not very smart.
I feel bad for him. He's like, this is I'm on this. And he's like mentioning all these drugs, like morphine. Like he's not a well man. And they're like in their 50s at the time. But if you watch this documentary, you can see how, especially now that we know it's 1 in 31 billion people, that he is definitely guilty.
Mm-hmm.
But you could almost believe his innocence if you watch this.
Yeah.
Because of how it's shot and how it's done. So
there's always a bias to things. Yep.
Exactly. Just goes to show you when you watch a documentary, you have to not totally believe everything 100% that they say.
Yeah. Well, and how many times have we done the podcast and then you look up something and it's got drastically different details, you know? And because it just depends on where you're getting the knowledge from and who's to say who's right or wrong.
Right. But I know it's interesting to the one police officer said, well, my friend said, it's a really crappy carpenter. Get cuts on your hands. And that's when he goes, yeah, I'm a bad carpenter then. I'm a bad carpenter. Yeah.
Oh, he didn't say it jokingly. He said it. He was trying to justify his cuts. Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
The investigators are like Jersey boys with the accents, talking to this Midwestern kid that has a slight lisp. But unreal. Just unreal. I'm curious what caused him just out of the blue.
Well,
like he hadn't seen Curtis for years.
I think it's probably what you said. She was outside and it was one of those random opportunities of chance. He hopped out to say hi to her, probably got her to go inside the house somehow. And then that was it. His wife, who is pregnant at home. Could you imagine?
She lied under oath for him when she probably knew full well that he, or at least suspected that he did. Because, like, the only thing they had was circumstantial evidence. As much as I hate it, it is still evidence. And you know your husband fairly well.
I think that happens a lot. I watched the 2020 from Friday night. And let me just say 2020, I'm a little upset with you because there's no ending. Because the upcoming trial is not till this fall. So I was like, wait, what? And I'm not going to go into it, but it was the same thing that these family members are sticking by their mother. And I'm just not so sure that's the right move.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I guess you hold out hope that a person that you love couldn't do something as awful as something like this, especially if it's your spouse.
I think you do, but I think you also have to look at it realistically. Just like if you're having an affair with somebody and your husband is brutally murdered at home when nobody else is home, then it comes out that you're having an affair. And then you've spent all this money that you just came into contact with, so much so that you're calling the police officers to hurry up and say it was, a murder, accidental death, whatever, so that she can get the insurance money. But I think the most grueling thing is that one of the people that are standing by her, she purposely, to her, she was supposed to be home at a certain time, the wife. And she chose to take a different way home for once, so it would make her get there like 5 minutes later, so that their daughter, would find her dad brutally slain in the backyard. And all the crimes there, that's the one that I was just like, that's on a whole different level. Is
this the one with the celebrity hairstylist?
Yes, Fabio. Okay. Yep. I'm not going to get into it, but something did occur at that very end there. Seeing how all this plays out, I don't know. Now I'm like, I'm going to have to track that trial down, make sure I see what happens.
See what happens? Yeah, I just looked it up because it's now a podcast. I listen to 2020 podcasts. It is one of the few I do listen to. Actually, I put it on before I go to sleep, and I usually fall asleep to it.
Point being, I think that happens a whole lot. There are some stories that we have covered and have seen in the press where the children do not. They know that their parent or that their spouse or that their girlfriend or their boyfriend is the
guilty,
the one that did it. But I do think you have to. Because otherwise, you're looking at your father murdered and your mother going to prison. Nobody wants that.
I don't know. I mean, if my father murdered my mother, I would definitely not want them around. Right?
But you'd think.
I mean, you have to want some kind of justice. Unless you're afraid of your father, I guess. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm the odd one.
Well,
I'd rat anybody out for the
reward money.
Well, duh. Yeah, for that. But also, I don't think my conscience would let me not say something. I have that want for justice in me.
I was, speaking of the reward money, a story that I was looking into. people just, I don't know if they quite think these things out. Double murder. He comes forth and says he knows who did it. It's this guy's. He did it. I was with them, but I didn't have anything to do with them. And they're like, okay. So the guy is lying. He thought that he could tell on his friend for doing this murder because he wanted the reward money. So he made all this up, not realizing that if you're with your friend as he kills people, you're
an accomplice.
You did it, buddy. You did it too. So then finally they broke it down and figured out he was lying, that he wanted the reward money. But he never realized that he thought by not doing it and just telling on his friend, then he would get the money.
Jeez.
Right? That's not how that works. That's not how that works, buddy.
I bet you they're not friends any longer. Could you imagine?
Nope.
Hey, Cam, I'm going to say that you committed the murder and then we'll share
I was there with you, but I said, nope, I'm not doing it.
We'll share the money after you get out of prison.
Yeah, that's crazy. So
unreal.
All kinds of people out there, I tell you what.
It is.
Makes you think,
all
like,
times.
what goes through their head, you know? Like, what are you thinking?
If they have anything through that head.
Yeah, I think many times not.
I don't know.
So until next week, I guess, remember, lock your doors.
Keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya. For more information about this episode, as well as all other sources, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by the hosts, Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertesi from We Talk of Dreams. You can reach Nico at wetalkofdreams.com. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from OctoberPod VHS. You can find all of his great works on YouTube. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter with the handle at Our True Crime Pod. You can also email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. We would also at this time like to thank our patrons. We would be so lost without you. Thank you so much. And if you would like to help support the show, you can check us out on patreon.com/Our True Crime Podcast. You can also show your support by leaving a 5-star review on Apple or simply just tell your friends about us. It's that easy. Love ya.